Welcome to the Cultural Integration Fellowship, and thank you for joining us this morning. We're founded in 1951 by Dr. Haridas and Beena Chaudhary as a center of universal religion and spiritual practice. In keeping with the spirit of unity in diversity, we honor the spiritual traditions of diverse cultures and religions. Today, we have a talk by Dr. Elena Mustakova, who's joining us from Bulgaria, titled Turning the Tide, Transcending Deepening Divisions and Stepping onto the Path of Peace. Dr. Mustakova is a psychologist, social scientist, and educator, coaching individuals and communities on living with depth, discernment, and ground, engaging in meaningful and impactful relationships with a shifting planet. To see more about her work, you would want to go to www.elenamustakova.net. Before I hand over the screen to Elena, I want to read a poem from Dr. Haridas Chaudhary from this collection called The Rhythm of Truth. The title of the poem is Life. Life is the self-painting of the spirit on the canvas of time and space. Gradual unveiling of the infinite in nature's sweet, silent embrace. On the limitless expanse of the ocean, life is the rising, roaring undulation. On the bosom of the absolute void, it is the outburst of joy unalloyed. In the heart of all-encompassing darkness, it is the sure conquest of light and harness. Right in the midst of chaotic disorder, it is the principle of harmony. Life is the play of hide and seek between spirit and nature. Spirit hiding in a deep, dark veil, nature tries it to discover. As nature moves forward in pursuit of spirit's hidden treasure, life leaps forth into radiant glory in ever increasing measure. Let's take a couple of moments to meditate on those words. I welcome Dr. Mustakova to the fellowship once again. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kundan, and thank you so much to the Cultural Integration Fellowship. It is truly a joy for me and a privilege to be back here again amongst friends. And I want to remember the last two lines that you just read, Kundan. Life leaps up in joy and ever-increasing measure. Is that how it was?
Yes, life leaps forth into radiant glory in ever-increasing measure.
That is so powerful. Thank you so much for starting our talk today with these beautiful words. Life leaps forth in glory in ever-increasing measure. It strikes me how poignant these words are, particularly now, particularly today, as we find ourselves in such critical times on the planet. And so as we are celebrating this year's divine springtime, Naw-Ruz, which is an ancient holiday across a very large part of the world, where people celebrate the coming of springtime and mark that as the beginning of the new year. In this time, I am trying to share my screen. So bear with me for a moment here. Here's my screen. In this time, as we are preparing to meet the divine springtime, to welcome a new year into the world, a new unfolding, a new promise, we also find ourselves in these very profound and critical times for the planet and for humanity. And so it's perplexing for many people. And at the same time, just as Kundan read to us, life springs forth in glory and in ever increasing measure. There's no mistake. It is happening again. But in this moment, for us to appreciate the glory and the ever increasing measure, it seems to me that we have to take time to truly and deeply understand what it is we're living right now and where this glory in ever increasing measure may be in this divine springtime. And so you can see that my topic today is turning the tide, transcending deepening divisions, and stepping onto a path of peace. And the vision that I have of this process reminds me very much of the Grand Canyon. There are so many layers, so many aspects of what we're living right now, so many splits, so much fragmentation. And at the same time, when you look at the Grand Canyon from above, it is one system. And this system is now in the midst of a very turbulent and painful restructuring. And so our ability to think about it in a spirit of glory in ever increasing measure is essential, because we don't want to lose spirit. We have to invest in spirit. And that's the beauty of this particular gathering. The mission of the Cultural Integration Fellowship is a unitive mission. And it is just such a joy to be part of this unitive mission. As of course, many of you know, it was inspired by the integral philosophy of Sri Aurobindo and Mother Mira. And their goal was to bring together the highest values of East and West in a creative synthesis. And how poignant of all times this is right now, to teach the complementarity of the world's great religions and to integrate the cultural and spiritual values of all people at a time of so much divide, of so much deepening antagonisms and uncertainty. So I'm very, very grateful to be a guest of the Cultural Integration Fellowship again, very grateful for the work that this fellowship does in the world, and particularly now. It's also very striking to me that the mission of the Cultural Fellowship is in fact a powerful continuation of the Baha'i vision, which is a vision of coming of age of humanity and the unification of the human family. And this vision originated in the mid-19th century in Iran in 1844, and was later on carried into the Western world by Abdu'l-Baha, who traveled across Europe, in fact, London, Paris, and then all over the United States in 1912, 1913. And mysteriously enough, and this may well be the glory, the rising glory of this age, that truth seekers, people who are seeking to guide humanity towards oneness, find each other. And in a similar way, Mother Mira met Abdu'l-Baha in Paris in 1912. And then she kept meeting him. Records say she met him at least 19 times in 1913. And she was so involved with the Baha'i community and its message of global unification that people even assumed that she might have been a Baha'i. And I guess she was a Baha'i in spirit, because her mission and the mission of this fellowship is unity, which is the message of the light. Before I go on with the Baha'i message of unity, which you see on the screen, I just want to say that Baha'is around the world are now in the last but one day. Tomorrow is the last day of the Baha'i fast. And at the end of tomorrow at sunset, we are going to welcome the Baha'i New Year. I'm afraid we have a little bit of an echo. Are you hearing me well? Okay, maybe we're good now. So the Baha'i New Year will begin tomorrow after sunrise. And this is the time that the whole Baha'i world will celebrate the new beginning, a new divine springtime. And we believe that the divine springtime that is being released, as the poem said, in increasing measure unto humanity is the springtime of unification, the coming of age of the human family on this small planet. This was the central message of Baha'u'llah, which you can see here was expressed in many of his writings, but you see here a quote from the Tabernacle of Unity, which was revealed in 1882 to people of Zoroastrian background. The tabernacle of unity hath been raised, regarding not one another as strangers. Ye are the fruits of one tree, and the leaves of one branch. Verily I say, whatsoever leadeth to the decline of ignorance, and the increase of knowledge, hath been and will ever remain approved in the sight of the Lord of creation. Say, O people, walk ye neath the shadow of justice and truthfulness, and seek ye shelter within the tabernacle of unity. Friends, just imagine in a very backward country at the time, in Iran, in 1882, this message was released not just to Iranian followers, but to the whole of humanity, saying, regard ye not one another as strangers. You can just really hear the powerful voice of the unknowable, really calling on humanity, letting humanity know that a new age is dawning. Further, in his gleanings, Baha'u'llah says, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established.
그렇죠. 전화.
I will continue. We had a little bit of an interruption here. So friends, a little bit more on the Baha'i message of unity, which has been unfolding since the mid-19th century, spreading all over the globe, because it is the will of the spirit of this age that humanity will unify. And that's why we have the Cultural Integration Fellowship doing its work as well. That's why Mother Mira met Abdul Baha. That's why there've been a rising number of spiritual teachers across the planet calling humanity to unity, because the time has come. At the turn of the 20th century, Abdul Baha says, in cycles gone by, owing to the absence of means, the unity of all mankind could not have been achieved. Continents remained widely divided, even among the peoples of one and the same continent. Association, interchange of thought were well nigh impossible. In this day, in this time of divine springtime, however, means of communication have multiplied, and the 5 continents of the earth have virtually merged into one. all the members of the human family have become increasingly interdependent. None is self-sufficient any longer, inasmuch as political ties unite all peoples and nations, and the bonds of trade and industry, of agriculture and education are being strengthened every day. Hence, the unity of all mankind can in this day be achieved. Verily, this is none other but one of the wonders of this wondrous age, this glorious century. Of this past ages have been deprived. For this century, the century of light, has been endowed with unique and unprecedented glory, power, and illumination. Now, friends, just to pause for a moment and take stock that these words were uttered just a few years before the First World War. Certainly, very few people on the planet at that point were thinking about interdependence yet. And certainly, it did not look like a century of light in many ways. And so this is a good example of how spirit rises in its glory and is released in ever increasing measure, as the poem started us off, because it really pointed the way through the message of Abdu'l-Baha. It was pointing the way to a still rather unsuspecting humanity of where we're moving to. And further, Abdu'l-Baha described this process through the 7 candles of unity. Behold how its light is now dawning upon the world's darkened horizon. The first candle is unity in the political realm, the early glimmerings of which can now be discerned. The second candle is unity of thought in world undertakings, the consummation of which will ere long be witnessed. The third candle is unity in freedom, which will surely come to pass. The fourth candle is unity in religion, which is the cornerstone of the foundation itself, and which, by the power of God, will be revealed in all its splendor. The fifth candle is the unity of nations, a unity which in this century will be securely established, causing all the peoples of the world to regard themselves as citizens of one common fatherland. The sixth candle is unity of races, making of all that dwell on earth peoples and kindreds of one race. The seventh candle is unity of language, the choice of a universal language in which all peoples will be instructed and converse. Each and every one of these will inevitably come to pass, inasmuch as the power of the kingdom of God will aid and assist in their realization. Isn't that amazing, friends? These are words that were uttered in the first decade of the 20th century. And now we see, so this is decades before the establishment of the unity in the political realm that we see, at least relatively so, in the United Nations, decades before that. Unity of thought in world undertakings. We now have science and spiritual understanding converging in ways that was never, ever the case in human history. And of course, unity in freedom, the striving for democracy and for human rights has really enveloped the planet, but was certainly not yet the case when he was speaking. The unity of religion, here we have the fellowship and the work it's doing, and many other organizations that are working for unity in faith, the Interfaith Alliance, the World Parliament of Religions. It's just really profound how much these processes that he pointed to are now full-scale global processes. And of course, we see the unity of nations at the United Nations. We also see the humanity of each country rising to uphold one human race, the elimination of racism, of racial prejudice and oppression, And we are increasingly sharing the language that we are speaking tonight, which allows people to understand each other a lot better. So what profound processes that really show the divine springtime. But we started with deepening divides. And so we have to be very realistic. We live at a very dynamic time. It's a time of parallel processes of both unification and deepening disunity. On the one hand, we now see, and that's what I hear from my Native American brothers and sisters, that we're now seeing the fulfillment of Native American prophecies of reunion of the eagle and the condor. The eagle signifies in Native American understanding the north and the life of mind, and the condor signifies the south and the life and wisdom of the heart. And just as we're speaking, Native Americans from all over the Americas are convening in the sacred land of Palenque, Mexico. This is sacred Mayan land. And they are preparing through a sequence of sacred ceremonies to establish the first indigenous council that will be ready to share its wisdom with humanity, with the United Nations at this critical moment in the world. In the mid-19th century, Baha'u'llah explained that we are going to see more and more unfolding these twin processes as humanity painfully and painstakingly moves towards what he described as the lesser peace. And in this process, he foresaw that humanity will emerge from local and national communities increasingly into a planetary civilization, which is inevitable in the social evolution in human history, from families and tribes to cities and nation states, and now a planetary civilization. He also warned very clearly that the social transformation would involve profound dissolution and discrediting of all familiar social structures. And we're living it now dramatically. We're seeing the deep loss of trust and faith in all familiar social structures. And what that will also propel, as he warned, would be a necessary expansion of long-held identities, which we now can see is very painful, very turbulent, very intimidating for many people. And hence the importance of this spiritual education work that this fellowship is doing to help people experience our oneness, recognize the spiritual ground that brings us together across our very different cultural and historical identities. So Baha'u'llah foresaw that this will result in unseen before global turmoil, which is what we're living. And he also foresaw that this planetary integration that we're trying to achieve right now will require all spiritual systems of the past to understand the principle of progressive revelation, that they all come from the same place and unfold human spiritual understanding and move humanity forward. And therefore, there's every reason for spiritual systems to unite around interspiritual understanding and practices that support the development of unity consciousness, not just in individuals, but also in cultures. And again, this is the work for which we're gathered here today, for which I'm profoundly grateful. This is the work of the future. It is a reality, though, that we're seeing the deepening affliction of disunity. We have a war raging right now in Europe and threatening to really swallow a much greater part of the world. There are enormous geopolitical tensions, and humanity is really under threat, under atomic threat once again. And Baha'u'llah was very clear in the mid-19th century that while spiritual people should never be involved in politics because politics are so divisive, They should be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age that we live in. And so we want to really ask some hard questions. What is the reason for this deepening affliction of disunity? For one, it is apparent that planetary life is still organized on the assumption of our separateness and of the supreme sovereignty of nation states with competing interests. Diplomacy is still understood as representing the competing interests of different nations, which is in striking contrast, not to say discord, with advanced science. Just last year, in 2022, 3 Nobel Prize physicists experimentally verified that our universe is a fundamentally unified and meaningfully informed entity of non-local energy. This radically new understanding of the unified nature of reality and of the evolving nature of our universe stands in contrast with our political and national fragmentation and this sense of competing interests. It also calls for an evolutionary shift to planetary restructuring, founded on unity of awareness, based on our existential unity in diversity. And thinking people around the world have recognized that. An example of that is the call of UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, on February 6th of this year, when he warned, as the war in Ukraine was entering its second year, that we are entering with eyes wide open, staring down the barrel of a confluence of challenges, environmental, social, economic, and political, unlike any other in our lifetimes. And that this, as he said, is not a time for tinkering, but a time for transformation. So what a poignant moment at this divine springtime. On the one hand, even science has now, settled science has proved our complete oneness and interdependence. On the other end, thinking people all over the world are rising to uphold that and to call for a restructuring that reflects that of the planetary governance. On the other hand, we're in the midst of war, deepening atomic threats, and some serious geopolitical dangers. And this is the context in which I would like to invite us to think a little bit about unity of healing and unity of justice as the foundation for planetary restructuring. In the mid-19th century, Baha'u'llah very clearly articulated unity and justice as the dynamic organizing principles of planetary life. Unity and justice. A good century later, interdisciplinary evolutionary science, physical science, and social science has summarized this reality of our interdependence in this unitive narrative, which you can see on this website, which basically tells us that we need to change our story, the story that we're telling ourselves, the story that our cultures are telling to our children. We need to really move towards a story of unity and interdependence, which is not the way children are raised still. So it's important to reflect on the dialectic between healing and justice. I would propose to you that healing and justice are interdependent. I think every one of us knows that from our human experience with our losses and betrayals that we all experience in one way or another in life. We know that healing involves seeking justice. And of course, we see the United States as a clear example today of how a country that has created perhaps the most progressive and democratic legal system and constitution and has been a beacon for democracy in the world is so afflicted with inner fragmentation and prejudice that it really cannot stand for justice until it heals. And that's something that I've dedicated a chapter on in my book, Global Unity of Healing. There is a chapter on this dialectic of unity of healing that's needed in the United States as actually a laboratory for the world. We know that healing reconnects, it repairs broken bonds, it overcomes fragmentation, and of course it unites. And we are also increasingly able to see on this multicultural and very moving, a planet full of populations that are moving across it, that you can't just have justice for one group anymore. It is not sustainable. It is only sustainable when this justice also unites all people. That's the only way it is sustainable. And so in an interdependent world, which is now a complex and very dynamic global system, healing and justice among vastly diverse cultures has to be systemically approached. What a challenge, what a divine opportunity of increasing measure again. So such systemic integration of healing and justice across all cultures, given our painful and fragmented and divided histories, involves many simultaneous levels of work. And spiritual and committed people all over the world are very much part of this process. And again, I'm reminded here of the layers of the Grand Canyon. So many layers, so many different substructures and substructures that have to be healed and brought into the whole in a process that is just and balanced for the whole. And here I'd like to just bring to your attention a document that the Baha'i International Community issued in 2020, titled A Governance Befitting Humanity and the Path Towards a Just Global Order. It's an extraordinary analysis of the challenge and opportunity that humanity is facing at this time. So, a few words about the early sources of unity, justice, and healing. I see the earliest sources in indigenous communities who, for many, many centuries, knew how to offer meaningful support to all involved in instances of injustice, while simultaneously restoring and maintaining community harmony. Now think about practicing justice this way, restoring harmony for everybody. That is an understanding of community principles of unity of justice that Native Americans, indigenous communities all over the world brought. And I'll quote here Chief Phil Lane Jr., who likes to describe the process in the following way. Starting from within, working in a circle, in a sacred manner, we develop and heal ourselves, our relationships, and our world. And yet, friends, we now witness the tragic fate of Native Americans and indigenous people of the Americas. From 100 million, they have been reduced to no more than 15 million. So, despite their profoundly spiritual communal practices, they were the subject of genocide. And since then, there have been so many more genocides on our small planet. And one seems to be going on right now, maybe more than one. So it is very clear that in addition to community principles, we also need a system of protection and accountability. That system will ensure that the period of global transition towards a just planetary society can really be safe. It can happen. And that's where the both divine springtime opportunity and enormous challenge in front of us is now, to create this system of protection and accountability. And there are many people who have made proposals. There are extraordinary proposals on the table worldwide right now. I'm just going to quote here one, the first Human Rights Commissioner, Professor Alfred de Zayas, has come to be known for developing his 25 legal principles of the international order, which have been called the Magna Carta of the international order. And that's just one example. There have been many. So perspectives on unitive justice, what are we really looking to bring forth in this divine springtime? Of course, with the turbulence of the planet and our increased mobility, there is also a crisis of identity. Obviously, historic circumscribed identities are having to expand, as we already spoke, and that can be quite threatening. And what is happening is that this crisis of identity, which is overwhelming for many people, is getting exploited by masked economic interest groups to feed divisiveness and draw greater profit from the resulting social instability. We know that the military-industrial complex is multi-billion-dollar complex, and that is, and it's increasingly powerful despite 78 years of UN peace and human rights work. So very precarious time. And in this time, our critical task is to help people understand that historic, ethnic, and cultural identities that seem to divide us were actually shaped and reshaped by encounters with other groups and cultures over periods of both peace and conflict. And in periods of conflict, when different groups encounter, they each understand and construct a little differently the universal human striving towards truth, justice, and goodness. And that's been the history of human civilization. Tribes and different populations have clashed in their aspiration, in their universal aspiration towards truth, justice, and goodness. And so to be able to take that kind of leap now and understand that our tragic historical legacies, which are true for pretty much every cultural group on this planet, are the result of this aspiration in the absence of understanding of interdependence, in the absence of global governance. This was the process of coming of age, of maturation, a painful process, and that we now can, in fact, transcend it. Just imagine if the people of Ukraine and Russia could think about their painful shared history in those terms. That really nobody is evil, but people have constructed truth and justice and goodness differently from very circumscribed worldviews and points of view. And now we have an opportunity to do it in a much more far-reaching way. And here I'd like to mention what I find to be a very, very inspiring on-the-grounds initiative. This is the Association for Unitive Justice. And I believe we have Sylvia Kloot, the founder of this association, today with us. I think I saw her on one of the screens. And they have been working for some decades now to develop a system that builds on our interconnectedness and our shared humanity to create individual and community well-being and safety, to avoid all punitive elements, because they recognize that beneath all the complexity of our conflicts, the real problem, the real issue is separation. Our perception of ourselves and each other as separate, of nations and human entities as separate. And therefore the solution, they say, is connection. And so Sylvia Kloot and her team have developed these profound 14 arcs of transition from punitive to unitive justice, which reflect, in my view, the psychological and spiritual education principles of unitive justice. So we have community principles that we spoke about from indigenous populations. We have systemic principles that have been really revealed since the mid-19th century by Baha'u'llah and have been growing in complexity and understanding, and also now psychological and spiritual education principles. And here's what their 14 arcs look like. If we have time, I may be able to come back to them in greater detail, but for now, I would just want 7 structures of individual transformation and 7 structures of community transformation. And really, it's quite a profound conceptualization when you think about structures in human life and how they are expressed. For example, the need for the structure of security and order, which historically has been expressed in human communities and societies through reliance on rules. But what we see now is the shift in the world, and this is also the shift that they work on in prisons and schools, from rules to values. Because there's a lot of research that shows that values are as much a driver as genetics. There's definite research on that. And then another one from in terms of the structure of governance, from control and the use of force, which is the familiar order of civilization throughout history, to self-governance. I hope we'll have time to come back to these. I'm going to have to move forward right now, and you can always go to the website of the Association of Unitive Justice if you'd like to study them more carefully. Contact Sylvia Clute and her team. They teach courses on how to apply this framework. They have a well-articulated process on the ground for schools and prisons and communities. And so you're welcome to explore that further. And if during the question time there is time, I can come back to this. So we see now a rising tide of global movements for peace that actually reflect in many ways the shift of the 14 arcs that you saw in the previous slide. Just one such example is the Global Futures Forum, which will take place exactly on Naw-Ruz, March 20th and 21st, no accident there. In the days where most of the ancient world celebrate the advent of divine springtime. And this Global Futures Forum that is taking place tomorrow and the day after was preceded by 2 months of e-consultations where citizens and civil society worldwide were invited to make recommendations on how to transform global governance according to the call of Secretary General of UN, that it's not time for tinkering, but time for deep transformation. And I've just listed here 5 of the most prominent proposals that people have, civil society, global civil society has come up with to improve the selection process of the UN Secretary General, which is currently selected by the Security Council, which makes the Secretary General not really independent, to create a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, which will have citizens and citizen groups, civil society directly elected on it, not representing national or political interests, but really the voice of humanity. There's also the recommendation to establish an instrument for a World Citizens Initiative. How powerful a divine springtime. Friends, when have you seen human imagination expand so far in terms of what's possible in restructuring the planet? There is a very strong call to review the UN Charter, Article 109, which actually was supposed to be reviewed over 10 years ago, if I understand correctly, and it has been deferred and deferred because that is the path to reconsider the function of the Security Council. and to create a UN civil society envoy. And these are just 5 examples. There were more. And as I already mentioned, while the Global Future Forum is unfolding tomorrow and the day after, Indigenous people are creating their own council ready to counsel humanity. Because Indigenous people have gained through their suffering and their long history, the understanding and the capacity to help us see how we can heal our intergenerational traumas and lateral violence globally and move towards an era of peace. And so a few more perspectives on unitive justice. A group of us came together last year and formed this circle, synergy circle for unitive justice and human security, global security, because we recognize that at this time of profound climate change, biodiversity crisis, global pandemics, and all kinds of other planetary boundaries crises, what is needed is to really redefine how we understand justice. There can be no justice on a planet where environment is collapsing, where loss of biodiversity is causing whole populations to disappear, where nations will be disappearing, island nations will be disappearing in the not so distant future. So we really need to redefine the understanding of justice. In the era of the Anthropocene, where humanity is actually influencing natural processes powerfully, unitive justice involves just relationships with all life. And there have been some very profound proposals I want to also mention here for global systems accountability, which is not something we have right now. So when nations or businesses report profit, they have to also report their footprint on the environment and therefore have to be fully accountable, a whole different system than how we operate. So unitive justice is the critical pillar for human security. How can we have human security and meet all the sustainable development goals of the UN without unitive justice that honors the interdependent relationships that we all stand in? And this is the path to really prepare communities worldwide for effective human security, to begin to work towards unitive justice. That is a radical educational reorientation from the way children are still educated at this time, both in school, by the public discourse, but also by cultures. Children are not taught unitive justice. And again, it is for spiritual communities to lead the way in this understanding and in the change, in the educational change. So we are facing the next great evolutionary leap towards interdependent planetary cooperation and building the ethical, cultural, governmental, and legal structures that protect global human security. Among those, there have been very clear proposals and recognition that we do need the creation of a global force that can protect global peace and protect the transition processes of humanity. And that this global force needs to look very different than any military forces we now know. But that's a more complex conversation and a different one. Ultimately, what we're talking about is a transformation of civilization from a material civilization, which we now have, to a civilization of character. And the Baha'i writings remind us with these words, be just. Can this nominal civilization, unsupported by a genuine civilization of character, bring about the peace and well-being of people? And here's the vital work of spiritual communities, because we understand the vital relationship between spirituality and society. As Abdu'l-Baha pointed out in 1875, in The Secret of Divine Civilization, spirituality channels the divine force into social structures and processes, and it thus becomes socially generative. So democracy has a very central spiritual dimension, honoring the sanctity and dignity of life, of each life, of every life. I'd like to quote here, I know I have to wrap up, so I'm going to move through this very quickly. The Islamic tradition, before all else, God created the mind. And it reminds us of the need for scientific and spiritual understanding that must work together. And that's a fundamental Baha'i spiritual principle, the convergence of science and scientific and spiritual understanding, of intellect and wisdom. And what do we have now? What has happened to the life of mind in public discourse and in media? We all know the painful flattening, the social corruption, the corruption of religion, and the corruption of science that has devolved into trying to subsume all knowledge under methods of objectification. So I may just go through this very quickly. We have different sources of knowledge and wisdom, sense perception, reason, traditions, and there's also prophetic knowledge. And we need to learn to integrate all four and draw on all four with wisdom, and not preference one type at the expense or even against other types and sources of knowledge and wisdom. And I'm coming here to the end of my talk, returning again to the vision of the Grand Canyon. And this is a letter from the Supreme Baha'i Body, Universal House of Justice, is what we refer to it as. And in this letter, it says, in the current climate of social and moral decline, at a time when in the world at large, moral decay, hypocrisy, and compromise are endemic, and words unsupported by actions have lost their value, we have to become distinguished from moral excellence and by the quality of our individual lives and the nature of our community life, not only to bring peace, security, and true spiritual happiness to individual heart, but to transform society as well. Vast work of the Canyon underway among us. And I'll close with these words of Baha'u'llah. In every dispensation, the light of divine guidance has been focused upon one central theme. In this glorious revelation, this glorious century, the foundation of the faith of God and the distinguishing feature of his law is the consciousness of the oneness of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Elena. That was absolutely beautiful. The ground that you covered, beginning with the connections between the mother and Abdul Baha. And of course, you know, when we have the Baha'i Faith offer a program at the Cultural Integration Fellowship every year, in a certain sense, we also celebrate that relationship, you know, the relationship between the mother, you know, who's the guiding force behind our organization, and Abdul Baha, you know, who took the message of Baha'u'llah all over the world. It's interesting in that, you know, there were some beautiful movements that began to happen in the 19th century and mid-19th century, as you rightly pointed out. And as I was listening to you, I got reminded of the fact that the Vedic and the Iranian connection actually goes a long way back. You know, at some point in time, you know, they were the same people. So, you know, when we look at Iran and how Baha'u'llah, you know, offered his vision to the Zoroastrian people, you also have a sage in India by the name of Sri Ramakrishna, you know, who started talking about very similar principles. And as my own research shows, you know, there's a profound continuity between Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda on one hand, and Sri Aurobindo and the mother on the other hand. So, so different lights emerging in different parts of the world and reuniting where? In Europe, and things sort of coming together in wonderful and beautiful ways. And the fact that for a certain point in time, there had been this disconnect that had happened between divine and the world. And I think both Baha'u'llah and Sri Aurobindo and the mother, did incredible amount of work in sort of bridging that divide and transforming life which is here. And that included transforming, every aspect of our human existence. So I cannot, appreciate enough how much I enjoyed your talk and the ground that you covered. I'm pretty much sure that, that we would want to go back to this talk of yours many different times and sort of, revisit the beautiful nuggets that you have shared with us. It's 11:56 Pacific time over here. We have a few minutes for question and answers. I'm sure there will be a lot of people who would want to offer their comments. We won't be able to take their comments, but what we can certainly do is that we can take, a few comments and a few questions. But given the size of group that we have, I would request people to basically raise their hand and unmute, himself or herself, and speak. And once the comment or question is over, mute himself or herself again. So I see Ruth raising her hand. I was just wondering if you could unmute yourself, Ruth. And
yes, I'm just hoping that these slides could be shared so that we could keep thinking about it and review it, because it's so much to take in. And that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure, I'm
I
sure.
would be very, very happy, of course. So I will be happy to share them with you, Kundan, and you're welcome to put them on your website or share them in whichever way makes sense.
Sure. I see Dorna Badal.
Hello. My question is, how do we engage in peace and justice efforts in a non-political way?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. And that was exactly my intention with this whole vision of unity of justice, because ultimately change towards peace on this planet is going to happen as we work within our communities and in various forums where we are engaged to introduce the understanding of justice that has to be unity for this age. Nothing is really just if it counterposes people against each other in this age. This is not the justice of the age. The justice of this age is unitive. That is the reason why I made unity of justice central to my presentation, because this way people on every level of community, nation, international can be engaged in educational processes, helping others to understand that we have to come together. The only way we can find justice is by bringing together what appear to be separate and competing interests. So that is the way to work very radically for peace right now without causing division or playing into the divisiveness. Thanks for your question.
I see Shao.
Oh, hi, Elena. My question is, how do we respond to the dark forces of the old world still at play? We see all these very troubled matters, but with this unified intention, but how as an individual person we can approach that?
I've been listening to quite a few discussions on this particular question in the last week leading up to the future summits. And people are raising this question again and again because, of course, it's so poignant. This is what we're all living. And what was suggested again and again is that we need to learn to speak to all groups and kinds of people and help a person move from an I to a we. When a person is stuck in fear, in a defensive stance, they don't understand how their choices and actions impact the we that reverberates back to the I. That's a question of education. So it is depending on what axis, who and what we're working with, whether with individuals or with groups or with organizations. It is a very powerful work right now to think through how we can help people understand that the I actually impacts the we and the we impacts back to on the I, so that we can move to a whole, basically a unitive justice way of thinking about solving problems, which is not how our education is. And I think addressing the dark forces, at least from a Baha'i perspective, we don't understand darkness as a separate entity, but as the absence of light. It is the absence of understanding. It is the absence of understanding of our interconnectedness, of the fact that, physicists, settled science has shown that we are all embedded together in a field of non-local energy. And so my actions and choices don't just pertain to me. They reverberate through that field and come back to me. But we don't understand, we don't know that. People are not educated that way. That's the work in front of us. It's a beginning. I don't have conclusive answers. Nobody has conclusive answers. This is a powerful process, but as humanity comes together more and more in these forums and organizations, there are solutions. Some of them are educational and some of them are structural. I mentioned the fact that there is also a push to create a global force that is able to stop the forces of violence at this time. So there are various solutions. It's not just educational, it's communal, it's systemic. Yeah, I have to stop here. Thank you.
I see Prasad Vepa here, and he has a question. So I was just wondering if you could come in and pose.
Thank you very much, Kundan. I really appreciate your taking my comment, really, not a question. I want to totally echo your sentiments that you very eloquently expressed. I totally appreciate Dr. Mustakova's talk today. It is so wonderful, so inspiring. And I just want to add the comment that this whole approach is very resonant and completely consistent with what the Bhagavad Gita says. Basically, it answers, tries to address two questions: the who am I, and pointing out that we are all divine consciousness. There is no you and they, but there is no other. There is only you. And the second point in the Gita is what is my dharma, and dharma is justice. So this is exactly what Dr. Sylvia Cluth and the whole the Baha'i organization and what you are doing is totally consistent. Of course, the Gita goes way back centuries ago. So it is so resonant. It is so appropriate. The timing is so right on this Naw-Ruz. So may there be a bright and not only a great Naw-Ruz, but a very vibrant future. So thank you for all the work that's being done at CIF and the Baha'i organization. Thank you so much. Enjoy it.
I want to thank you for this beautiful comment and for the eloquent way in which you reminded us that the source of all knowledge is one, and it is the unknowable. And all manifestations and all wisdom traditions have proceeded from that place. And they teach these universal realities. The language is somewhat different, the context is somewhat different, but the universal realities that are being taught, they are universal. All knowledge is one, says the Quran, and the ignorant have multiplied it. Maybe we're not ignorant, but we work with multiplicity in the realm of the manifest. But it's wonderful that we remember that this ancient knowledge has been with humanity, and now humanity is mature enough that it can organize its planetary social life accordingly, which wasn't timely earlier. At the time when the Bhagavad Gita was revealed, this wisdom was there, this understanding was there, but the mass of humanity could not, there were not the conditions to organize planetary life this way. So here we are now. What an opportunity.
Yeah, the Gita shows that the joy is the fruit of our consciousness or awareness, and our ego is the dark footprint of our ignorance. So the two are really go together, and that's what the Gita points out. Thank you again.
You, I see Nishin wants to come in. Yes, Nishin, please unmute yourself. Nishin, we are not able to hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Yes.
Okay, so where in this big picture of the awakening and rising of human consciousness can an individual find their place?
That's a good question. At every level. It certainly begins with what we were just reminded now that the Gita teaches as well. Spiritual transformation starts from within. Not seeing separateness and otherness within ourselves. That is the spiritual practice where everything begins. But it doesn't have to stop there. It goes outward towards our families, our communities, our organizations. I just went all the way to the Global Futures Forum. Citizens are able to participate. You can enroll tomorrow and you can put forth your proposals. This is the divine age that we live in. We can participate at every level. It is only a matter of initiative. Everything is possible. That's what this divine springtime is. So we have to think of opportunities right now as unlimited, but it certainly does begin with finding that oneness within ourselves and then radiating it outward.
Beautiful words, Elena. And I think I would like to close today's program on those words, finding the oneness within. That's the key. And this is something, which has been emphasized over and over again in many different spiritual traditions, which is about finding unity and union with the divine and operating from there. And that was also the reason, why Sri Aurobindo would say that integral yoga is not for humanity, but it is for the but it's for the divine. The understanding, of course, is that divine encompasses humanity. So finding our union with the divine is extremely important, as we work towards the transformation of the world. And with those words, I cannot thank Elena enough for this beautiful presentation. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We'll look forward to having you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy Naw-Ruz to all of you.
Happy Naw-Ruz. Thank you very, very much.